I'm Dr. Michael Latola.
And I'm Megan Strong.
On this week's Case of the Week, I'm going to share some tips and tricks with you to hopefully make your next large Biotemp case go down easy.
And first it was Marathon Man, then Little Shop of Horrors, now Woody Allen. Find out why New York dentists are upset about his portrayal of a dentist.
And a Canadian dentist has paid $30,000 for John Lennon's molar and wants to clone him. Are we really going to start cloning humans? I've got G.V. Black's fingernail, and I'd like to start there first. That and more on today's Chairside Live. Hey now, hello and welcome to Chairside Live, episode 66, just like the famous California highway. Miley, Megan, how are you?
Miley.
Last night were, the VMA Awards, and she
Yes.
did that very controversial dance. I'm worried that Miley Cyrus might influence my own daughter, so I watched it a good 11 or 12 times just to make sure that the content was okay, and I decided it was not.
Okay, well, I might be 66 years old because I didn't even watch the VMAs.
Ooh, how unhip.
I know, and you know what else the number 66 represents?
2/3 of Satan?
Oh, wow. That is so disturbing. No, it represents the number of times that I have fallen and completely just banged up my entire body from mountain bike riding. But this past weekend, we went mountain bike riding, my husband and I didn't fall once. If you've watched the show for any amount of time, you've seen all of my injuries, bruises, scratches. It's not been pretty. But I survived this totally without injury.
But in all fairness, I happened to be at the same place you were, and I saw you just rode around the parking lot.
Oh,
so that really doesn't seem like it counts.
Don't listen to him.
All right, we've got a great show for you today. We've got an interesting case of the week. Once again, I'm going to steal the spotlight for the case of the week, and it's not one of my own clinical cases, but I got a phone call from a dentist who I know who loves Biotemps, but was really frustrated with a Biotemps case that he tried to seat last week. And it reminded me of my own frustrations that I had at times with Biotemps. It's nothing wrong with the Biotemps itself compared to other temps. It's just part of the process. And so what I wanted to share with you today was some of the solutions that I offered to him that I think can make seating a large Biotemp case much easier. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at that now. For today's case of the week, I wanted to share something with you that's been a particular frustration of mine over the last 12 years that I've been here at the laboratory. And it's with one of my favorite products here at the lab, which is Biotemps. And we look at this patient who we've already prepared. Of course, it's a typodont. And you can see we've prepped from first molar to first molar, from 3 to 14. And this is a case, any kind of case like this, I'm certainly going to use Biotemps. In real life, the patient's probably missing a tooth here, maybe a lateral here, and another bio over there. And so we're going to want the Biotemps for the strength of the bridge. But anytime we're prepping this many units, if it's 4 full crowns, I always am going to do a Biotemp. And it's not just because I get them for free. It's because they look so good, and it really can simplify the whole process of temporization. But then sometimes things kind of go off the rails, and things are actually more difficult than they would be with a chairside temp. It's not that a chairside temp would be impossible here. It would just probably take a lot longer than a Biotemp. Unless the Biotemp's not fitting, then that's going to take a much longer time, and you might not even have a bailout position. So let's take a step back real quick. Let's pretend we haven't prepped the patient yet. This is what the patient looked like when they came in. So we have some alignment issues, and we're going to go in and prepare all these teeth for crowns once the patient gets here. But even before that, we're going to send this model to Glidewell and ask for Biotemps for these 14 units. And so here's what it looks like when the technicians have had a chance to prep the model for Biotemps. They are under strict direction not to remove more than a millimeter from any tooth structure here. And as we zoom in a little bit tighter, you'll see they do try to be very conservative with their planes. They do, of course, mimic the occlusal surface, which is sometimes, why tabletop preps don't work, but they try to be very minimal in their axial reduction and at the gingival margin. All they're trying to do is eliminate undercuts from all these preparations because they want to make the Biotemps as thin as possible. And so here's our Biotemps restoration as typically ordered by a dentist. It's got the wire reinforcement. And again, it goes from tooth number 3 to tooth number 14. And even with this minimal amount of preparation, so for example, on this patient, we're doing EMAX. Even with this minimal amount of preparation, which is not enough for EMAX, the shell of the Biotemps fits onto the preps quite easily. And there's no undercut problems. It just comes right on and off of those preparations. And when you show this to the patient, they'll get very excited. You'll look at it and you go, wow, these temps are going to look awesome. We actually have a scan and save program now with the Biotemp product where if you put these in the patient's mouth and you both look at them and the patient says, oh, those are gorgeous. We've already scanned what these Biotemps look like in the lab, and you just say, hey, replicate exactly that in Emacs. It's really the first time we've been able to do this. We used to try to approximate it by hand, but now we can actually do it digitally. So if you like how the Biotemps look or the patient loves it, we can make you teeth, individual crowns that are the same size, shape, length, contour, surface texture, all that good stuff, and replicate that from the Biotemps into the permanent restoration. So again, with minimal preparation, these fit right into place. And so now we prep our patient for Emacs, which requires more of a prep. In fact, when you look down here, you'll notice you can see the margins all the way around as we look down here, which we couldn't see on this because they really didn't prep any margins. So we actually have more reduction here than we did on the model that the Biotemps technician did. But here's the issue when we tried to put the Biotemps into place. And I've had this happen countless times, and they just don't go down into place. What we want is a passive fit. These should fall into place on the preparation and just seat all the way down, just like they did on the other model. Remember on this prep model, basically all I had to do was take this and just slide it into place. I mean, no effort whatsoever, just sliding it into place. Again, on a minimally prepped tooth. And then here we go to our patient, our real mouth, where we've actually prepped it more than that, and it won't go down. And this was a big source of frustration for me and continues to be to this day. So let me show you a couple ways around this issue. The first way is to actually order the Biotemps in segments. This is something that I started doing years ago, and it cleared up a lot of these problems for me. So what that would look like, and I typically keep it as you're going to see it here, with one segment from 6 through 11, and then 2 posterior segments. And of course, if the second molars were on here as well, we would just include those on the posterior segments. So now we have 3 different segments of Biotemps that we're going to reline individually. And in a case like this, where we're maintaining the patient's bite, the vertical dimension of occlusion, it's very easy to do. We would just prep these 3 teeth first, and then while we finished that and took our impression, my assistant would make the temporary using the rest of these unprepped teeth to maintain that vertical, and then those Biotemps would be done. Then I'd probably come over here and prep these 3 teeth and get those done. And then if we had time, I'd move to the 6 anterior teeth. I used to come in and give anesthesia here and anesthesia here and anesthesia everywhere, and then run out of anesthesia because I'd prep these, and then these would be waking up. So now I just do it a segment at a time without rushing too much, because this way, if I end up getting these 2 prepped today, these 6 preps and the temps are all in, now I can let the patient go if need be, if they're getting exhausted or I'm getting exhausted, and have them back and do these 6, in a week or so, because I've maintained the vertical here. So when we take those segments to the patient's mouth, we'll just pretend that we did prep all of these. And I go to place these 6 anteriors into the patient's mouth. You'll see all of a sudden now we're very close to having passive fit all the way down. We just have a little bit of material that we're going to pick up in the reline material, and there's no problem with that at all. The beauty of the Biotemps is what you see on the incisal edge and the rest of the tooth. If we have a little bisacral margin up here, that's going to be fine. So all of a sudden now we've got a much better fit when we have that segment put into place. And then we'll take a look at a couple of the posterior segments. And again, nice passive fit there without too much issue. And same thing over on this side. So whereas with our full splinted Biotemp, which is certainly easier to deal with from the standpoint it's just one big horseshoe, one big unit, it would not go down into place. And you have to, I would always ask myself, well, wait a minute, I prep more here than I did here. What's going on? And it typically has to do with the mesial and distal surfaces on the preps themselves. See, we prep this because we know this is going to be 14 single units of Emacs in this case. When this was prepped, the one thing that the Biotemp preparation technician had in mind was, I need to make all of these preps draw so that I can get this big temporary bridge to come on and off with no issues. We weren't thinking that when we prepped these teeth. We prepped these teeth as individual crowns. We did not worry for a moment about whether or not these were all going to draw together, because this isn't a bridge. And so the disconnect between this is the fact that we've prepped individual crowns and the technician here has prepped as though this were one big bridge. And of course, it's much easier to do that staring down at a model than it is in the patient's mouth with a mouth mirror. And that's why a lot of times making it one big segment like this doesn't work, and it won't go down, and you won't have passive fit. So what can you do if you did order it this way and you didn't order it in segments? Well, the first thing is, one of the things that you can request, and I request this on every single case, it's called a prep guide. And what the prep guide is a suck down, a thermoform splint that goes over where the Biotemp technician prepped the teeth. And so they do a suck down over that. So if I have a large Biotemps bridge that isn't fitting, I'll take the prep guide and I'll put it into the patient's mouth. And this is going to give me an idea of where I haven't prepped enough. Now, in some cases, it's correct. In some cases, it'll be touching, and I'll go, oh, I under-reduced there. Although, honestly, since I started doing the reverse preparation technique, that doesn't happen very often anymore. But it can happen interproximally. We don't place depth cuts with the reverse preparation technique on the mesial and distal surfaces, and so sometimes I'm under-prepped there. But you can get an idea when you put this in if, in fact, you have reduced enough everywhere. And you may have reduced enough everywhere, you just don't have draw between all of those. But sometimes it'll show you where you're under-reduced, and that's actually a nice thing. So if you try that in, you see some areas where the tooth is touching the stent, you can go in and make any adjustments you need to, and then see if the Biotemp bridge will go into place. If it doesn't, typically the next thing I will do, you really have one of two options here. When you look at this bridge, you'll notice that, again, my feeling is that it's the interproximal areas that are keeping this from seating all the way. So the first thing we can do, or one of the things we can do, is blow out all the interproximal areas between the teeth. When you think about it, we really don't need these interproximal areas that we see here. You know, when you look at some of these areas here, this is just something that happens to be there because it was made on the model, but if we blow that out and get rid of it, we're going to pick up those interproximal margins with our reline anyway. So I will often do that first, where I will go in and actually just kind of blow out some of those connections. So just on a couple teeth here, I literally just come in. I'd use a burr, probably a little pointier as I got to the anterior. But I don't need these connections. You know, I'm turning this into a taco crown of sorts. All of a sudden, it's becoming like a facial, occlusal, lingual shell without any interproximal connections here. And so you can just go through here and blast all these out. Because again, when we reline these on the teeth, we're going to pick up all this information. In fact, you could almost have the Biotemps made without it if you wanted to. But I typically have it made with it because it's nice. It leaves much less finishing if you're able to have these interproximal contacts in place when you do the relining. It's a little wide here. I don't want to break through to the facial, but again, something a little thinner at the tip does a better job of breaking those connections. So once you've had the opportunity to go through and cut all those, you can try it back on the model again, or in the patient's mouth, I should say, and see if you have better fit. You know, we've got a little better fit there. Of course, I didn't blow through the anterior ones, and a lot of times it's the anterior teeth where it's getting hung up interproximally. Another choice would be to take this and turn it into our segmented model. And I don't like this way quite as much because it leads to a little diastema issue at times. But certainly, when you've paid $25 a unit for this times 12, and the patient's, you know, counting on having some really nice temporaries when they walk out because you told them how nice they were going to look because they were worried about what are my teeth going to look like for 2 weeks till I get the permanent crowns. You want to use this. You don't want to let this go to waste. And so this is necessary sometimes to be able to use this. So basically what we're going to do is turn this into a segmented Biotemp. And again, we have the wire reinforcement here, about the thickness of a paper clip. So that's why I'm using this diamond disc to cut through here. And so basically all we're going to do is just separate it like the other ones were separated by segmenting it distal to the cuspid, between the cuspid and the first bi. And then once I've segmented it, I'll go back in with that other burr and polish it a little bit, both sides of it, especially to make sure that wire is not pointy. And so now again I have a segmented one and I cut it on the other side as well. So now I have these two 3-unit ones that we're going to reline separately, and then our 6-unit one in the anterior. The downside of doing it this way is typically you almost always end up, after you polish it, with an open contact between these two teeth. So you'll put these both in and reline them and take them out, and there'll be an open contact. I just fill that with some flowable composite. I just put flowable composite in that undercut and cure it, knowing that it's not perfect, but I don't want the patient getting things packed in there, and I don't want them to have a space. So because of that reason, we put a little flowable composite and just cure it in there. It'll stick well enough to the outside because the glaze that's on the front of the Biotemps has been removed by us cutting and then reshaping over here. So the two ways to do it, my preferred way would be to hollow it out first and keep it all as one piece because it's much easier to deal with as one piece. If it still doesn't work, I would cut it into sections, and at that point it usually almost always will go down when we just have the 6 anterior teeth isolated from the 2 other 3 teeth sections. If it still doesn't work at this point, the one last bailout position that I have is my second stent that I ask for with every Biotemps case. So the first stent that I ask for is the prep stent, and that's the suck down that's made over the prep model. And the second one is the suck down that's made over the Biotemps themselves. So if you look at what it sits down on top of the Biotemps, they've just done a suck down on top of that for me. I call this the Bailout splint or the full contour splint, but I colloquially kind of refer to it as the Bailout splint because now I have a suck down of exactly what those Biotemps look like. So if I just can't make this work and I'm getting frustrated, there comes a point where you have to do something, and you might have a pre-impression, but again, on this patient, if we had a pre-impression and we're making temps, they're going to leave looking like this. They're not going to be thrilled about that. We kind of said there would be an aesthetic improvement right after the first appointment. So we have this suck down of the Biotemp. So now I'm going to take this, I'm going to fill it with bisacryl material. So I'll fill it with something like Luxatemp and then seat it down onto the preparations like such. And now all of a sudden we're going to get a big chairside temp connected all the way around so we get some nice bulk, some nice strength. And the actual chairside bisacryl material is going to have the same size and shape of the Biotemp. So it's going to be the same kind of arrangement, except it's going to be chairside. It's going to be in bisacryl, so it won't be as strong. It won't have the wire reinforcement that we have in the posterior. It won't have the super nice glaze like we have here, but it's going to be pretty darn close. At least it's the same size and shape, and at least the patient leaves with some nice looking provisionals where they've actually had some aesthetic improvement for how they walked in the door. In fact, some doctors actually like to use this, what I call again the bailout splint for their reduction. So they'll put this over the preps and look to see how much they've reduced, and have I reduced enough? Do I have enough room between the stent and the prep for the final contours or whatever required thickness is for the Emax in that area? So they'll put this on over the preps as well and check it, and that's fine. That's a good thing to do. Sometimes I'll poke some holes in it, put a perioprobe in just to kind of to measure that as well. Although I do like to use, as I mentioned, the prep one before, just to make sure I removed at least a millimeter like the Biotemps technician did. So hopefully I've gone over a couple things here that you may or may not have found frustrating in the past. Anytime you're doing a larger case like this, I always recommend that you just have them made in 3 segments right off the bat. It's a little more of a hassle to deal with, I understand. Sometimes I'll even take the 3 segments like this, and you can either make like a little putty hot dog and mix up some impression putty and put it over here and try to seat them all at the same time. I've done it before, and I know doctors who will take this splint, the bailout splint, and put it over there and then take it all off together and put the bisacryl in and then seat them all together in the patient's mouth just to make sure they get related to each other properly. But for me, I don't have any issue doing this segment first and then this posterior segment next and then prepping these last. And yeah, sometimes we have to adjust contacts here to get that to go down, just because when they sit on preps, oftentimes they'll have a tendency to rock a little bit based on the reduction. They can rock facial lingually, and you just want to make sure. They tend to always rock to the facial, and so you want to make sure when you reline these that you have the patient bite together, and before you reline it, when you're just trying it in passively, and make sure they don't look Bucky Beaver. I've never seen them tilt back to the lingual. They always tilt out to the facial, which is good for giving you room for the occlusion. But you want to make sure that your patient doesn't leave, looking like John Elway with some huge anterior teeth. So we'll often check that, and that's why some doctors like to seat all 3 segments at the same time. So again, Biotemps, one of our best products, a magical way to give a patient just some wonderful temporaries, but because of the fact that we're prepping for single units and the techs are prepping for a restoration that's going to draw, there's discrepancies here that make it difficult to use at times.
Now let's go to a segment we call Viewer Mail. This week's viewer mail comes to us from Dr. John Lose, and he writes, Dear Dr. Datola, here's a scenario. A PFM falls off. Tooth is fine. Cement is visible in the crown and or on the tooth. Cement is cleaned out with Cavitron. Crown is re-cemented. New scenario. An Emax or zirconia crown falls off that was bonded on. How are you assured that the cement is removed from the tooth and the crown, as most bonding agents are clear? Also, how do you remove the cement from the tooth and the crown? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question, John. Scenario. A PFM falls in the woods and nobody hears it. Did it make a sound? I'm getting all heady.
Yeah,
a little existential on you.
deep.
I know,
My
it's driving you
goodness.
crazy. Well, your first scenario that you pointed out was correct, and that's kind of the old PFM standard that we are used to, and now you're asking about, what about one of the new high-strength cementable all-ceramic materials such as Emax or Bruxer, and they're slightly different. But basically, to answer your question about cleanup, how am I going to make sure the cement's out of the inside of the crown? Only one way I know of that's safe, at least, and that's sandblasting it. I'm lucky here at the laboratory to have sandblasters all over almost every floor, and they're all set about the same place, right around 50 psi with 50 micron aluminum oxide. Some of them are turned down a little bit for some materials, some are turned up for other ones. Actually, most of the research out there is done with 35 psi air pressure running into a sandblaster with 50 micron aluminum oxide sandblasting particles. And so that's the one way to make sure that you can get all that stuff out of the inside. I haven't seen a cement yet that will stick to the inside of one of those when you hit it with some good sandblasting for 20 to 30 seconds. It's probably more difficult to get it off the tooth once you either cemented it or bonded it into place, and that's why I love my Cavo sonic scaler that you see being used here. In fact, I use this every time we take a temporary off to make sure the tooth is clean. The temporary cement falls right off for the most part, but I use this tip and go around the tooth just to make sure that we've removed any kind of pellicle, any kind of leakage, any kind of bacteria. And that's certainly the same way that I would try to remove some cement. You're right, cement does happen to be clear in a lot of cases. And so if you're not sure if you've removed it all, you've just got to dry that tooth off. And that's the one way to really make sure that you've removed it all, is dry it. See some tooth structure, and then if you see something funny next to it that doesn't look like dentin, then I will take a handpiece with a fine grit burr, the red stripe 40 micron burr. I'll put it in my electric handpiece and I'll turn it way down to 2,000 RPMs, and I'll go around the tooth with the water off, getting that cement off until I can see tooth. You can definitely see the difference between the two. In fact, yesterday I was showing a new dentist who we employ here now how I take off veneers, and one of the difficult things about cutting off a veneer is that you've got, let's say, an A2 veneer and then some translucent veneer cement underneath it, and then maybe you've got a tooth underneath it with a nice prep shade, and it's very difficult to tell where to stop. And that's that same kind of case where I turn the speed way down on the electric handpiece to 2,000 RPMs and turn off the water, because as you go through the porcelain material, you can definitely see when you get to the cement and the tooth structure with the water off. So again, I'm either going to use the Cavo sonic scaler on the tooth, and hopefully that gets it all. If not, I'm going to my electric handpiece at 2,000 RPMs with the water off with my fine grit red stripe 40 micron diamond, and they're going to blast the inside of the restoration with that 50 micron luminous oxide sandblaster. And Danville Engineering sells a little one that you can hook up to your chair itself, and you really should have a sandblasting unit there at the chair, or at least in your lab in the office for things that need to be sandblasted, and that'll take care of most of that. The only other thing to worry about is if it's a Bruxer crown and you try it back in again, we have the issue of the salivary contamination, but we've covered that ad nauseum on this show and in other places. But again, that's only really relevant if you have a very short clinical crown or just a completely non-retentive prep. Otherwise, you can just put it back on and not worry about it. All right, that was great. I like that. I'm glad somebody brought that up.
Yes, and for John, we have something very special. Dun, 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 dun.
It's the clock.
It is. It's the clock, John.
It's always the right time to watch Chairside Live.
Oh, that was
Isn't it?
That was
Is that
clever.
smooth? You like that?
Yeah, I do. And what else do we have?
Well, we got a picture of us standing together, me looking presentable, you looking very nice.
Thank you.
And we've
We'll
also
sign
got
that.
a burr kit for him. And I just mentioned the fine grit diamonds that we were talking about. And this is a fine grit diamond as well in the Bruxer burr kit. So we'll send that out to you because you're going to be able to use this to clean up the tooth if need be. And of course, you can also remove it to adjust Bruxer or cut Bruxer crowns off if you need to do that as well. So all this will be on its way out to you, John. Thank you so much for writing in and thank you for the question. Megan, do we have any news stories today?
Well, of course I do.
Good.
Here we go. Some dentists in New York are very upset at the actor Woody Allen. They claim his new film, called Blue Jasmine, negatively portrays dentists. The chairman of the New York University College of Dentistry says dentists are constantly portrayed in a bad light, from killers to buffoons to sexual harassers. In Allen's movie, a former socialite takes a job with a dentist who later begins to make sexual advances towards her. The chairman says the movie is just another one added to the list of movies having fun at dentists' expense. He says it doesn't help the profession.
Really? Yeah, come on. I mean,
Give
this
me
isn't
a break.
that big of a deal.
No.
This is not, okay, so he starts hitting on an employee. Okay, that's not good.
Right, but he could be a dentist, he could be...
Yeah, what if he was an architect? Are
It
they
would
going to
make
be
no
out
difference.
protesting?
Right.
Considering that we're the profession that had Little Shop of Horrors,
Mm-hmm.
that did for us what Jaws did for the beach.
Okay.
There was that horrific Corbin Burnson movie, The Dentist,
Uh-huh.
on HBO. Followed up by The Dentist 2 for some reason, where he pulls out all of someone's teeth. It was so bad that in one part where he had a patient partially under so he could abuse them by pulling out all their teeth for his collection, the nitrous oxide mask was on upside down. It's like they didn't even have a dental consultant there to make sure that the
Right.
instruments were used
Where's the
correctly.
Where's the script supervisor when you need him?
Exactly. Easy for you to say. And the
Or
thing
not
about it is,
so.
we haven't had a good role model since Jerry the orthodontist on the Bob Newhart show. Now, you're too young, I
I'm
think,
way
to
too
remember
young.
Jerry. But he had this great fro and wore the white smock, and everybody liked Jerry. He's kind of a happening guy. So, yeah, we haven't had a lot of good role models. We had Cuba Gooding Jr. in that Disney movie with the dogs, ice dogs, snow dogs,
wow.
something like that.
Yeah.
And he was a decent role model, but does anybody really care? Is anybody not going to go to the dentist because of this movie? I think it has more to do with the handpiece, the syringe, and painful injections.
Yeah, I think that would probably be the deterrent.
I would think
Yeah.
so. So I'm going to probably see that movie this weekend, and I'll report back if I'm personally offended while I'm watching.
Sounds good.
Anything else?
Yes. In episode 26 of Chairside Live, which, by the way, if you missed it or want to catch up on previous episodes, you can go to chairsidelive.com, YouTube, or iTunes to watch. Check out my hairstyles from earlier episodes. It wasn't pretty. But on that episode, I reported on a Canadian dentist who bought John Lennon's tooth for $30,000. Well, after going on a tour to raise mouth cancer awareness and participating in a number of charitable events, the tooth is now headed for the microscope. The dentist has agreed to work with U.S. researchers to explore the musician's DNA. The details of the research are confidential, but if sequencing is possible, the dentist wants to preserve the valuable information so one day it could be used to clone the famous Beatle. It will also be used for a UK documentary on celebrity genetics. You can learn more about this dentist's quest at www.johnlennondna.com.
Really? We're going to clone John Lennon?
Are you serious? Like, come on.
That's pretty funny.
It's ridiculous.
I like that. I like that he spent $30,000 on the tooth. I guess that's the only body part of John Lennon's floating around. You know, it's not like you see, go on eBay and see his prostate or anything else up for auction. So I guess this would be the one piece of him if you wanted to have it. And I think when we did the story the first time, it turns out that this dentist in Canada played in a band. I think he's a really hardcore musician. So for him, I think this means a lot more than it would to just the average person who might think it's a waste of money. But I'm glad he's going around and raising awareness about oral cancer. I don't know what exactly he's doing. If you come and take a picture with the tooth and pose with it, put your arm around it, and You're probably not allowed to put it in your mouth and see if you sing like a beetle. But have you seen it? It's got a big hole in it. It's not the best looking tooth in the world.
Yeah, and I just think, it's one thing to collect it because he obviously is a huge Beatles fan, but it's another thing to say, well, I want to save this because one day I'd like him to be cloned. That just opens up a whole nother can of worms because, you have that cloning issue and...
I think that's called how to get headlines.
How to get what?
How to get headlines.
Oh,
how to get people to write about it, to say, I want to clone John Lennon, and then I want to join a band with him, and I'll be the Paul McCartney to the John Lennon.
Next morning you wake up and it's the headline in every newspaper.
Right. Exactly. I heard, by the way, that Yoko Ono's the one who broke up that molar. That's the reason that cuss came off. It was all because of her. By the way, the first story we did, Jennifer Aniston portrayed a dentist.
She did.
Remember that in Horrible Bosses? Mm-hmm. And made unwanted advances towards a male employee who wanted none of that.
Right.
Yeah,
please.
That's really going to happen. That'd be like me, making advances to a woman and her saying no. What are the chances that's actually going to happen? About 100%, as it turns out. All right. That about wraps it up for this edition of Chairside Live. On behalf of myself, Megan, the CSL staff, and everybody here at the lab, I want to thank you for your time and your continued commitment to quality dentistry.
We'll see you next time.
I'm Dr. Michael Latola.
And I'm Megan Strong.
In this week's Case of the Week, I'm going to share some tips and tricks with you that hopefully help you out on your next large Biotemps case. Temporary case. Biotemps case.
And first it was Marathon Man, then Little Shop of Horrors, now Woody Allen. Find out why New York dentists are upset with how I'm reading this story. Did you want to twerk for the camera?
I think you should both twerk.
No, thank you.